Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the latest recommendations that the National Medical Commission has made for people with disabilities. We also talk about 40 army officers being posted to the Air Force and the Navy establishments. But first, we talk about the wrestlers' protests. On Sunday, the Delhi police detained wrestlers Vinesh Fogart, Sakshi Malik and Bajrang Punia, who had been protesting at Jantar Mantar for over a month against BJP MP and the president of the Wrestling Federation Brij Bhushan Singh, who has been accused of sexual harassment by 7 women wrestlers, including a minor. The police, while detaining them, said that the wrestlers were in violation of law and had dismantled the arrangements at the protest site. Though the wrestlers say that this is just an attempt by the administration to shut their protest down. To talk more about this development, Indian Express's Nihal Koshie joins us. Nihal, could you begin by talking about what led to the police detaining these wrestlers?
The wrestlers a few days back had said that they would march to the new parliament building on the day Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated it, and they would have a Mahila Mahapanchayat there. So there were women organizations from Haryana, Punjab and even parts of UP coming, and a lot of farmer organizations, worker unions, they were all to join the wrestlers.
जैसा कि आप सब जानते हैं, आज महिला सम्मान महापंचायत करने जा रहे हैं हम नई संसद के सामने। 35 दिन से यहाँ रोड पे बैठे हैं बेटियों के इंसाफ के लिए, लेकिन कोई सुनवाई नहीं हो रही है। पूरी दिल्ली को
So this was their big plan to highlight what they were fighting for, which is justice for the women who have been allegedly sexually harassed by Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh. But they didn't get permission, because if they had got permission, then they would have been allowed to march. And on the eve of the march also, Bajrang Punia, the Tokyo Olympic bronze medalist wrestler, said that they haven't got permission even though they've written many letters. What happened on Sunday was the entry points to Delhi were blocked, like we've seen during the farmer protests. So many people, leaders were stopped at the border of Delhi. And in Jantar Mantar, the wrestlers were advised not to leave Jantar Mantar, but they were determined to go. So they started moving towards the barricades after a while, and they wanted to cross over the barricades because they were claiming that we wanted to go, we asked for permission, we never got. So they were heading towards it, and it resulted in chaos there, and the wrestlers were detained. The visuals were disturbing, I would say, because these are some of India's best wrestlers.
Right, and these visuals that you're talking about have been all over social media and TV. For those who might not have seen them, could you describe what we can see in these videos?
You can see wrestlers being dragged, you can see wrestlers being pulled, and they of course are refusing to go with the cops. You should also remember they are not you and me, these are Olympic and World Championship winning wrestlers, so they know how to grapple. So it was not the greatest of scenes on a day a new parliament building has been inaugurated. Like Neeraj Chopra tweeted, there should have been a better way to deal with this, because these are some of our finest wrestlers and they have been asking for justice for women. And Vinesh, when she was taken away in the police van, she said Naya Desh Mubarak Ho, which is an obvious reference to what was happening a couple of kilometers away in parliament, with Prime Minister Modi inaugurating the parliament, and also the fact that in this Naya Desh, women's voices are not heard.
Right, and the wrestlers we know, after being detained, were released later that day. But could you talk about what exactly they have been charged with?
So since they had to be detained and there was a physical confrontation, the wrestlers have been booked under IPC sections 147, which is rioting, 148 rioting, armed with a weapon, 149 unlawful assembly, 352, which is assault, and 353, which is again assault to deter public servant from discharge of duty. So these are the cases against them. FIRs have been filed, but as we speak now on Monday evening, there has not been any action yet. But FIRs have been filed, and the cops basically are not going to allow them to go back to Jantar Mantar, because their reasoning is you were there and these are the FIRs filed against you. So the DCP of Delhi has also tweeted saying that if they come to ask for permission in Jantar Mantar, they have other options, other protest sites in Delhi where they can go to. So basically they want to stop them from being in central Delhi.
And how have the wrestlers reacted to this? What are they saying about how they want to continue?
On Sunday, I spoke to Vinesh Phogat after she was released, around 7ish she was released. And after that, basically she said, Ladai jari hai, means they are not backing down as of now. And they want to continue their protest. I am sure they will come up with ways to make their voice heard, to protest, because the protest, according to them, has to continue.
And Nihal, like we said, there has been a lot of talk about this action online. And there is this particular photograph of Vinesh and Sangeeta Phogat that has been floating around, where they are sitting in a bus after being detained, and they appear to be smiling. And this generated a lot of controversy, but it was later found that this was fake, and this image was actually altered using AI. So could you talk about this picture and what we heard about it?
So this is one of the first photos which came on the Wrestlers media group. So the Wrestlers have started a media group for press, where they basically announce when the press conferences and they sum up what people have said on that day. So it is useful for us, so you know when the press conference is. And this is one of the photos which popped up there. And in that, both Sangeeta and Vinesh were not smiling. So the first reaction when I saw this photo, I knew there was some mischief in it. And then as we know now, it has been altered. So these are the dirty games. I mean, people who want them to fail play. And in this day and age of technology, we need to be alert. Even as journalists, it can happen to you anytime. You see a photo, you think it's original because of the tech behind it. So yeah, but I knew it, and most journalists by evening knew that this was fake. But the narrative was planted. See, they are smiling and going to the police station. What does it mean? And the counter narrative was even our freedom fighters, when they were arrested, were smiling, but they were not smiling. I spoke to another wrestler yesterday. It was a traumatic event for them because they're not used to this, even though they fight on the mat. To deal with cops on the road is different from fighting on a mat in Olympic standard facilities, It was traumatic for them also. It was not easy for them.
And Nihal, these protests have been going on for over a month now. What concerns do you think this development raises, especially considering the fact that no action has been taken against Brij Bhushan Singh?
See, in this case, there have been 7 complainants, and out of them, 1 is a minor. And all the 7, including the minor, have made their statement before a magistrate under 164, which is admissible in court. Now, if it was you or me who these wrestlers had accused of sexual harassment, and the statement before 164 was made, there was a 99.9% chance that we would be in jail. Now, in jail, it doesn't mean that the person is necessarily guilty, but at least till the investigation takes place, to ensure, because this is a minor, that the child is protected. Nobody tries to influence the child. And here we are talking about a very powerful MP. He is the king of Gonda and surrounding areas, Ayodhya. He's had many cases filed against him. He himself calls him a Bahubali. He is influential. So he is somebody who can influence the minor's family. I'm not saying he has, even though wrestlers have claimed that the minor's family, they have received threats, they have received offers of money, but that is unverified. So in most cases, if it wasn't Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh, he would have been behind bars, at least till the investigation was completed by the cops, but that hasn't happened. Here, there are 7 complainants, and we have got details of complaints. We have put it on the front page of Indian Express, where Brij Bhushan allegedly touches women on their breasts, raises their t-shirts, touches their belly button. He's made them feel uncomfortable, allegedly. At least these complaints, if the cops have it, and this is good enough for an arrest, means at least till the investigation over, let there be a fair probe. But the fact that he is not being arrested, even though there's a minor racist questions, and see, the people protesting, they are not the common man. They are international faces. They brought glory to India. If they have to sit in protest for so many days, just imagine how powerful this MP is. He's a BJP MP and he's untouched. So that speaks volumes of how difficult it is to get the wheels of justice to move.
And next we talk about Indian medical courses. Recently, the National Medical Commission, which regulates medical education in the country, made recommendations about whether candidates with disabilities can enroll in certain medical courses or not, and whether they should receive the benefits of a quota. These new recommendations were made by a panel that was set up by the Delhi High Court earlier this year. And so far, these recommendations have received very mixed reactions. To tell us about them, Indian Express's Anonna Dutt joins us. Anonna, before we talk about these recommendations, could you tell us, when it comes to people with disabilities, who all can apply to do their MBBS?
So there are different guidelines that the Act has for the 21 different categories of disabilities that are listed. But in general, for medical courses, 40% is taken to be benchmark disability. People below 40% can apply for medical courses, but they don't get the 5% disability quota. People above 40% and up to 80% can apply for medical courses with quota, and above 80% are usually ineligible. But there are certain disabilities for which there are different limits. For example, if you are visually impaired or you have hearing impairment, speech impairment, then the cutoff is 40%. So above 40% you cannot apply unless if you use a hearing aid or visual aid, some sort of assistive device, and bring it down to 40%. So 40% is the cutoff limit in those conditions. In general, it's below 40% you can apply without quota, 40 to 80% you can apply with quota, above 80% you cannot apply.
And Anonna, with something like visual or hearing disability, 40% is perhaps easier to understand. But when it comes to mental or even locomotor disability, for example, how do we judge that 40% mark?
So if we take a simple locomotor disability, for example, then they will see various things, whether you have power in your hand, whether all your joints are intact, whether all your joints are mobile. And based on that, they will keep giving you scores or deducting scores. And that is what adds up to, say, 40%, 80%, whatever. So this is done by a medical professional. They will go through your range of motion, things like that, and give you a score based on that. And as for the mental disability, again, there are various ways to look at it, and there are these international guidelines which look at, say, for different disabilities, they would have like a list of things. For example, is the person able to do their day-to-day activities properly? Is the person able to maintain their personal hygiene? Is the person able to complete their coursework? Is the person able to communicate with people? And again, all these points will give you marks or deduct marks from it, and then arrive at a percentage for the disability certificate.
Right, and we understand that people have been facing problems in trying to get a disability certificate of their liking and enrolling in these MBBS programs. And every year we see people filing cases in the court regarding it. And a person with a locomotor disability had recently approached the Delhi High Court with a problem, and which is what led the court to direct the National Medical Commission to take a relook at their guidelines and see whether, for example, people with assistive devices can be eligible for enrolling in these programs. And now a panel has made some recommendations, which you write have received very mixed reactions. So talk about what exactly has this panel said.
So a committee was constituted after this court direction with experts from these 17 centers that actually issue these disability certificates. And there were 2 experts from different specialities, like 2 experts from orthopedics, 2 experts from neurology, and like this. And they were asked to see whether the current guidelines could be modified in a way to make them more inclusive, or to add certain criteria which could help more students and clarify the confusion so that these cases don't end up in court. So the committee met, and they have submitted their recommendation, and the NMC also sort of has accepted these recommendations, but these guidelines haven't been put out in the public domain yet, and it hasn't been put up in the Gazette. So it's not a formal guideline yet, but it's in the process. So when we talk about the guidelines, there are good things and there are bad things. The best thing is the recommendations for the mental health. The doctors who did look at the mental health guidelines said, and at the moment for mental health, it says that anybody who is below 40% mental disability can apply, but anybody above is not eligible and they cannot get quota, because they said there is no way of objectively ascertaining what is the percentage of the disability. Despite saying, like less than 40% is eligible and over 40% is not eligible.
Right, despite the fact that you are assigning numbers to mark whether someone is eligible or not, but at the same time you are saying, well, there's no way to judge.
Yes, they said there's no objective way to judge. So the doctors in the committee actually raised this point and they said your guidelines are actually, contradicting itself. So we shouldn't do that. And another important thing that they raised in their recommendations, they said most people do not develop these mental illnesses before the age of 18 years, at which time you're giving them these certificates. So if they get it later on in their lives, later on when they're already doctors, there's no way to, say that, oh, you have 80% depression, so you cannot practice medicine. So they said in view of all these, we shouldn't restrict anybody from applying for a medical course as long as they're able to complete the course. And they said anybody who's judged to be more than 40% disabled because of mental illnesses, they will be able to avail the quota. But there is no upper cap on what percentage disability can apply for medical courses.
Okay, so it seems that they're being more considerate and understanding of those with mental disabilities. That's one good thing. What are the others?
So there are two more points in the good part. The doctors who looked at the recommendations for visual impairment and hearing impairment, they did not really change the criteria of who's eligible and who's not. For these two disabilities, people who are under 40% disabled can apply without quota. Over 40% cannot apply at all. And if you have a disability that can be corrected, say using a LASIK surgery or whatever, like visual aid, and brought down to below 40%, then you can apply with quota. So that's a very small number of people. What they have done is, instead of changing these guidelines, they've just added the names of a couple of devices like a telescope or a magnifier for the people with visual impairment and a cochlear implant for the hearing disabled. And that's important because now cochlear implant is picking up in the country and there was a lot of confusion and people would not get a disability certificate with the cochlear implant. So they have included that and that would make more people eligible.
Right. So these are the good parts. What are the bad parts? What are the recommendations that are being criticized?
So not so inclusive guidelines, when we talk about it, the most important one is locomotor disabilities. And locomotor disabilities at the moment, the guidelines say that anybody who has over 80% locomotor disability will not be eligible for a medical course. So the committee has suggested removing this 80% cap, which you would think is good. But then they have added conditions which a person has to fulfill for them to actually get into medical courses, and they are further restrictive than what it was. So earlier, 80% or more than 80% you wouldn't be eligible. Also, you wouldn't be eligible if your hands are not intact. Now they have said, okay, for the hands, we'll accept if a candidate has their dominant hand is completely intact. But if they have, smaller amputations in the non-dominant hand, like a couple of fingertips or one finger complete, then those people can be accepted, but they should have full sensation in both the hands. But then they have said that when it comes to the disability of the lower limbs, they should be able to perform activities like sitting, standing, pulling, kneeling, crouching, and they should never have a wheelchair or two crutches. So this makes it extremely restrictive because even with some of the people who are on wheelchair could have a 50% disability, 60% disability. So they will now become ineligible with these conditions that have been brought in.
Okay, so based on this recommendation, which again is not a guideline yet, anybody in a wheelchair would not be eligible to apply for a medical course.
Yes.
And how have people from the disability community reacted to this?
They're absolutely not in favor. And here we should talk about Dr. Satyendra Singh, who actually helped us get these draft recommendations with the help of an RTI. He himself has suffered, polio attack and has disability in one of his limbs and uses a crutch for working. And he has absolutely been against these guidelines, especially seeing that, he has seen people in the profession working with wheelchairs, and something like consultation in a clinic doesn't really need you to move around a lot or say, kneel or crouch. So his basic objection was, why are we making them do things that they might not need to do it in the entire career? So the reactions haven't been favorable. Same thing for the neurological disabilities like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's. And these diseases can be progressive So the committee has recommended that the certificate be given only after treatment and at the time, like based on the disability at the time of admission. And there should be repeated screening. So they're saying that they should get the screening done at the undergraduate level, postgraduate level, and super specialty level. Actually, right now it already happens at the undergraduate and postgraduate level. And again, the objections have been the same, like there are already practicing doctors who are working with these disabilities and are able to fulfill their duties. So why shouldn't they be allowed to get into medical courses? And instead of thinking of making, putting in place systems that would help them to do more, we are restricting them from the education altogether.
And Anonna, what is the next step here? When do these recommendations actually become guidelines?
So to make them into actual guidelines, the National Medical Commission would first have to put out the draft guidelines in the public domain for consultation. Once they have received comments, they can then include the comments or have people discuss what changes should be made based on these comments. And then they have to put this regulation up on the Gazette for it to be followed. So it's a lengthy process. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's surprising that these are the recommendations. And one of the most important point is that none of the doctors who were involved in formulating these recommendations were from the disabled community. Something which the National Human Rights Commission does say that you should do when you're talking about anything to do with disability.
And in the end, we talk about the military. The Indian military has now decided to post 40 army officers to the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy. And similarly, officers from the Air Force and the Navy will also likely be posted to army establishments. Now, although this has happened on a small scale before, this is the first time that 40 officers are being cross-posted to other branches of the military. To understand why this is being done, my colleague Utsa Sarmin speaks to Indian Express's Amrita Nayak Dutta.
So Amrita, can you begin by telling us how will this cross-staffing help the Indian Armed Forces?
So Utsa, this is the first time that a large batch of around 40 army officers in the rank of Major and Lieutenant Colonel, they have been posted to the other two services, which is the Indian Air Force and Navy. And while there have been such instances on a very low level, on a very minuscule level, this is the first time such a big batch of officers, they will be posted to the other two services. And coming to how this will help, you can say is a precursor to the creation of theatre commands. As you know that one of the major defense reforms that is in works right now is the creation of theatre commands. So when an officer of the army is getting an opportunity to work in the Air Force or in the Navy in certain spheres and vice versa, what happens is that it will help them get a taste of how things work in the other two services, as well as understand the basic ethos and the way of functioning there.
And can you talk a bit more about what you just mentioned, the theatre commands? So what are they and how they generally work?
So the armed forces are in the process of drawing the final contours of its theaterization plans, and as per the plans, all the individual commands of the three services, they will be clubbed into specific theatre commands. Now, the details of how many theatre commands would be there and other stuff are still in the discussion process. We had earlier reported that there could be the plan which is being discussed right now is to create adversary-based theatre commands, which is, one facing Pakistan, one facing China, a maritime theatre command. And there could be a fourth theatre command as well, but nothing is finalized as of now. This is a major defense reform. It will help in better jointness and integration of the three services. That's the purpose. One theatre would be comprising elements of all the three services. It will have a land element, it will have a naval element, it will have an air element. So that is how a theatre command would be. So it's the major defense reforms. It is going to take some time. But the move of cross-staffing that we just spoke about, that is a precursor to that move. Because when army officers get a taste of how it is to work in the Navy and when a naval officers get a taste of how it is to work in the Air Force, that helps them understand and function seamlessly in different services. So this will help when the theaterization actually happens.
And Amrita, could you tell us the significance of a theatre command?
So it sort of brings synergy between the three services. For For example, when you fight a war, there could be different elements which could be required. To fight a war, you might need some air element, you might need the Air Force, you might need the Army, and you might need the Navy too at the same time, right? So if the services are working differently and in different commands, I wouldn't say that so far there is no synergy. There is obviously synergy when needed. But having said that, when you have a theatre command where all the three elements are present in some form or the other, and that is coming under a common commander, that helps in quick decision, and that would also help in fighting a war in a more effective and efficient way, because you have all the elements together under one roof. So that is how effectively a theatre command would help.
Right, and the cross-staffing, as you mentioned earlier, it is a precursor to theatre commands. But could you tell us if there are any concerns about this cross-staffing? Because, all the three branches of the military, they operate differently and the officers are trained differently.
That's right. So while all the three services have their own ethos and own way of functioning and certain specializations which is very exclusive to that service, even then, there are certain commonalities in the services. For example, the missile units of some of the services are similar. The helicopters in some of the Army and the Air Force are similar. The UAVs are similar. An Army officer who's handling, for example, a certain UAV in the Army can also handle the same UAV in the Air Force. So this is how this cross-staffing move will help. It will not take away the core competency of the officer. The officer will do similar role in the other service as the officer does in his own service. But at the same time, it will be in a different service. So if an Army officer is handling a UAV in the Army or a certain telecommunication equipment in the Army, and he handles the same thing in the Navy and the Air Force, so it will help them get a taste of the different service while, retaining their core competency. So this is how it will mainly work, because certain things like the vehicles, missile units, certain equipments, they are common across the three services.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, with help from Utsa Sarmin, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.